The burgeoning rivalry in college basketball is the rivalry that continues to grow between St. John's and UConn. UConn in 23 and 24 gave college basketball a run that I don't think we're ever going to see replicated yet again. Dan Hurley's team ripped through 2 NCAA tournaments like a chainsaw through butter, winning those games by an average margin of victory of over 21 points per game. We may never see that again in our lifetime. And UConn, for years, has bullied and embarrassed St. John's. Since 1992, St. John's has won 6 NCAA tournament games. And since 1992, UConn has won 6 national championships. And now these two programs, who are in the Northeast, who are in the Big East, are both peaking at the right time. And you have two coaches, Rick Pitino and Dan Hurley, that have won multiple national championships. UConn won 2 of the last 3, 23 and 24 in dominant fashion. They've got pound for pound, inch for inch, as elite of a coach as there is in the sport. A coach who last year led UConn, despite being structurally flawed without a top-tier point guard, to the round of 32 in the NCAA tournament and a 2-point loss to the eventual national champion Florida Gators in the round of 32, despite shooting 8 of 29 from three-point range. I talked to Florida staff after the NCAA tournament. They told me, John, the hardest team we faced in terms of a defensive perspective, in terms of stopping them, was UConn. And now you're looking at St. John's, and you're looking at this program coached by Rick Pitino, a Hall of Famer, a 2-time national champion, somebody who has taken 3 programs to the Final Four. And you have both of these programs going on an upward trajectory. UConn got Alex Karaban this week. UConn got a big-time upgrade in the transfer portal in Silas Demery Jr. out of Georgia, who was a part of a team that went to the NCAA tournament. Now you put him next to Solo Ball, who could enter next season with All-American intentions. Now you put him next to Karaban and Jalen Stewart and Jaden Ross and Taris Reed and Braylon Mullins, a 5-star freshman. And now you have UConn better equipped to be like UConn, like we saw in 23-24 versus last season. Both of these programs, St. John's and UConn, will start next season as top 10 teams. And this, I will say again, is the burgeoning rivalry in college basketball. There are certain rivalries that are always going to be baked. Duke, Carolina, Kentucky, Louisville. But great rivalries are made from great hostility. And these are two head coaches, Dan Hurley and Rick Pitino, who, let's just say, are not going to get together for the holidays and exchange Christmas cards. They're not going to text each other and get together for drinks over the summer. There's hostility between both programs. UConn, for 25 years, had dominated St. John's. More than that, 30-plus years, had dominated St. John's. St. John's last year got back in the game. St. John's beat UConn twice, including once at Madison Square Garden and once at Gamble Pavilion. Now you look ahead to next season and you see 2 top 10 teams with 2 of the top coaches in the sport. Dan Hurley, 13-1 in his last 14 NCAA tournament games. Rick Pitino, somebody who has lifted a program from the ashes and put St. John's in the conversation right now about entering the 25-26 season with the best roster in the sport. And I'll say it again, if Milos Uzan from Houston stays in the draft, St. John's is going to be number 2 on my ballot behind Purdue. There are certain intangibles that you can't account for when you're forecasting teams. You can't account for the retention of Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, and Trey Kaufman-Wren. You can't account necessarily for the culture of Houston's program if you get a veteran point guard back like Milos Uzan. But if Uzan doesn't come back, St. John's is in the 2-hole. And I'm somebody who has devoted his life to college basketball. This is what I do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And I'm telling you now, on April 30th, I want St. John's and UConn to play 4 times next year. Once at UConn, once at Madison Square Garden during the regular season, once in the Big East tournament at Madison Square Garden, and another time in the NCAA tournament. I don't care where it is, because this, again, is the burgeoning rivalry in the sport. And the Big East needs it, and college basketball needs it. Hostility leads to great rivalries, and we have a potential great rivalry between St. John's and between UConn. The Huskies have done yeoman's work in the transfer portal. Silas Demery fills the gap. Malachi Smith, great backup point guard from Dayton. And the retention, obviously, of bringing back 3 of your top 4 scorers from last season. Solo Ball, Caravan, Taris Reed. Now UConn, much like Sylvester Stallone in Rocky III, after he was beaten by Clubber Lang, has to get back to the beginning. And if you're St. John's now, and you are a St. John's follower and supporter, you have to embrace the fact that you are living in the golden era of St. John's basketball. St. John's did everything this past season except go on a deep run in the NCAA tournament. And if you're a St. John's fan right now, and you're looking at the roster you have, Ian Jackson, the projected starter at point guard, committed to North Carolina out of high school. Jozon Sannon, the projected wing starter, committed to Arizona before eventually winding up at Arizona State. Bryce Hopkins, the projected 4-man, committed to Kentucky out of high school. And Zuby Ejiofor started his college career at Kansas. When has St. John's ever had 80% of its starting lineup with prospects who initially committed to North Carolina, Arizona, Kentucky, and Kansas? This is the golden age of St. John's basketball. But to go through and get deep into the NCAA tournament, which is the only thing St. John's didn't do last year, it first is going to have to endure what I think is an incredible burgeoning rivalry with UConn, who will be significantly better than it was last year.